Welcome to the Altogether Show. I'm your host, Eric Satz, and that is Lorenzo Thione. Welcome, Lorenzo.
Hey, Eric. Thank you for having me.
Uh, just so excited to have you here. So, Lorenzo is a serial entrepreneur. He's been involved in technology, art, design, communication, things that affect social value. And he's currently the managing director at Gangels, which I'm not going to go into because I'm going to let Lorenzo tell you about Gangels. But all that aside, Lorenzo, in your own words, who are you?
I think people spend an entire lifetime trying to figure that out. But, I've always been someone who goes after an opportunity and something that inspires satisfaction, joy, connection, learning. I've done a lot of different things. I'm an entrepreneur at heart. I'm a learner. I'm an, staunch advocate for everybody's getting their voice heard and their stories told. And I do this with Gangel. I've done this in the arts. I pretty much make that sort of a constant of everything I do.
I love that answer. So let's go back to the beginning. Where and when were you born?
I was born in 1978, so past
You're
century. It's
just a
crazy.
youngster.
In Milan or near about, just outside of Milan, in Italy. So I actually grew up in Italy, Italian family, not speaking English. Some people can still detect an accent. There's some of it, but it's still pretty strange because I've lost most of it. I moved to the States midway through college. I went to the University of Texas in Austin. And then from there, sort of the story begins in terms of everything I got involved with. But the most meaningful thing that kind of is to note is that I arrived in the States just a handful of months before September 11 happened. And it had a
Wow.
huge impact on a lot of different aspects, personal, professional, things that would happen or decisions I would make years after that I only sort of recently kind of can trace back to living through that experience.
So before we get there, because you just covered a whole lot of ground and territory in a whole lot of years. Tell us about your parents and what they did and sibling or siblings and where you sort of fell in the family organization, if you will.
Yeah, small family. I have one brother older, about 9 years older than I am. So big age difference, but it's an age difference that makes a lot more, that you feel a lot more when you're younger. And now my brother and I are actually way closer than we were when he was a teenager and I was a baby, or when I grew a little older and he already had moved out of the house. My mom and dad, my mom had a huge influence on my upbringing in my life. She was a physics high school teacher. So she kind of really instilled the kind of desire to learn and the passion and the joy that comes from learning and solving and problems. And in fact, funny stories that kind of just places me right there in the geekdom. When I was probably not much older than 6, 7, or 8 years old, instead of maybe a little older, probably 8 to 10, instead of nighttime bed stories or any such thing, my mom, and it's not her fault, I would ask her. She was teaching me the fundamental of basics programming.
Uh-huh.
So that was, I played around on my mom's Olivetti M24 first, and then on a family's Commodore 64. And from then on, sort of just computers, math, physics was never really my passion, but, my mom probably tried.
The Commodore 64 was my first computer as well.
Yeah. Yeah. It was my first computer, the meaning the first computer that I controlled and that was my own and it was my domain. But I played around on my mom's Olivetti M24, a very early 86 mainframe or computer processor, uh, a few years before the Commodore 64 came out.
And so my mom was also the curious one in the family, and she was the one who came home with the computer, and it, but it was always the family's computer. It was never quite mine. I can't remember when I got my first computer that I could play with alone, but I totally get it, completely understand. And so, um, as you go through kind of high school,
Yeah.
at what point does computer science kick in? I mean, because that's what you go to UT for.
Yeah.
Um,
It's interesting. Computer science emerged in my life like very early. In fact, there were the first experiences with besides sort of what my mom was teaching me with computers in school was actually in primary school. We were using I don't know if this was something that was known in the States or was an Italian thing. I have no idea. It was a um, uh, an educational programming language called Logo,
I
and
don't remember it.
it was basically um, strings of commands that would move around a little triangle called a turtle that would
Mhm.
actually draw like a pen, and you could put it down or put it up or take it up from the virtual paper, and so you would draw. You would basically build little computer scripts that would actually draw things around, and that was my very first experience in school.
And
Um,
was that the first program you ever wrote?
Well, I think that was at the same time as my mom was teaching me basics and I was doing, like Hello World in basics and graduated from there. But then I had like a middle piece of my childhood when computers were, yeah, they were a passion sort of. But if you had asked me what I wanted to do and how I was spending most of my time, and again, really strange because this wouldn't rear its head until, well into my career, but I would have told you I wanted to be a film director. And I was writing scripts and signing up all my friends, and I had like a little VHS-C mini cam. And man, I for years, in later years, envied the newer generations because they had all of it. Now you can, in a little laptop, you can have a full-on editing studio with visual effects. And back then, I was using two VHS tape recorders to actually
Yeah.
like play, stop, pause to figure out how to edit things that I was doing. But then in high school is really where with the advances in just computer processor power and memory and games, and games was a huge part, still are a huge part of my life. And I think actually I owe a lot of skill development to video games in a lot of different ways. Um,
So I asked you in a questionnaire before coming onto the
yeah,
show, like if you ever weren't being Lorenzo, like if you never, was there a time where you weren't really you? And you said, yes, the time before that you had come out.
yeah, yeah.
And
That
can,
was
can
I mean, it's really one of those things that you really can't observe until you're outside of it. When you're in it, you don't have first of all, you're young. You don't even have the self reference tools and mental sort of acuity to kind of really understand yourself that way. But, I can trace back the feelings of being different and feeling like I was not quite the same as people would expect me to be in terms of relationships, and romantic relationships, as early as I was like maybe 12. Um,
wow.
and then that had a huge sort of kind of latent, impact on my life, just because it's this constant thing you're worrying about, you're lying about, you are, worried about, and all throughout high school, that was, I don't know, you would have to ask family and friends how well kept a secret that was, but it was certainly something that I had not revealed or come out to anybody with. And I think obviously on the negative sides, it can have a huge emotional impact, right? You are potentially feeling depressed. You're feeling, sort of like you're lacking a certain amount of emotional development and relationship development. On the plus side, and I say this with a little bit of cautious because I think the downsides far outweigh the plus sides, but it gives you this focus on the other things that feel safe in your life, things like work, study, close friendships, relationships that ground you a lot. And I think I accomplished and developed a lot, from kind of a didactic student, sort of studious wide point of view, then maybe I wouldn't have if this hadn't been part of what I was constantly worried about. And I mentioned how impactful September 11 was because it wasn't until I actually came to the States and I went through that experience. And, maybe, you can call it tropey, from movies or something like that, but it kind of gives you this moment of realization that, life could really throw something odd at you tomorrow. And the people you care about, or you might not be here anymore. And is it really worth living a life that feels unauthentic and hidden when you just don't know how much time is left? And that really was what pushed me out of the closet. I came out, and it was remarkably easier and better than certainly I had feared. And I fully appreciate that that's not everybody's experience. But I also, and I say this, often to anybody with whom the discussion is relevant, is I have never really met anybody, and I'm sure someone will be, but I've never met anybody who regretted coming out too soon. The regret is always, I should have come out earlier. It would have started a healing process and a growth process much sooner.
Was there a single most significant surprise in that process for you? Or did it go kind of the way you may have expected?
The biggest surprise, I think, was tied to someone with whom I had a close friendship that, was coming from a very conservative. This is actually a positive surprise, but was coming from a very conservative background, and it was far too often that the off comment around gay people or whatever would come out of their mouth, in an off color, almost insulting way. And at some point, I really felt like no matter what, I had to take it up upon myself to still confront them and come out to them. And what had happened is that through the years that we had known each other, he had developed a very sort of healthy kind of looking up relationship towards me. He was a little younger. He was in the same course of study. He was like trying to do the kind of same things that I was doing. He was looking up to me as a mentor, as a model. And there's a big bifurcation of the path that could come at that point, right? You basically either destroy that relationship and, sort of the mental model that they've grown up with is too hard to undo, or they have to reconcile between what they know firsthand and what they've been told, right? But they've never experienced. And I was really pleasantly surprised that it actually completely shifted his perception and his view. And he became, critical of the way in which his family had been talking about gay people or the LGBTQ community or LGBT rights issues just in general, and became much more of an ally. And this is actually really important for me because it was the first moment when it demonstrated on, my very first kind of firsthand experience reality, the power of representation and the power of demonstrating firsthand, not just by talking about it, but by showing what someone about whom you may have a preconceived notion or a prejudice can do, has done, will do, can achieve, can contribute to society and to you. It really is the most powerful way in which you change hearts and minds, right? It's the Harvey Milk, come out, come out, come out, because it's only when people know their friends, their family, their sons, their loved ones, and they understand that they are people, that they are the same people that they loved, that they can. And often when you're looking at people that maybe are not your close family, people that are doing amazing things and contributing to society in ways that you maybe had being told it was impossible, or being told it was just incompatible with who those people were. That's when you change society. And that was where that kind of germination, that notion really started for me and had a huge impact in the kind of things I did later.
So I want to pull on that thread a little bit. First of all, you got to love the positive surprise in that way. Um, so when you say it had a huge impact, right? Do you think that has influenced the way your public embracing of LGBTQ rights and promotion for social change and your association with Angels? I mean, what do you think that one personal experience really helped you uh, embrace a public supporting of rights for all people?
Yeah, I mean, I do. Obviously, nothing is just one single cause and effect, and everything sort of plays together and contributes together. But when years later, I would found this organization called Start Out, which it is sort of the genesis also for the work that we then did with Angels. Start Out is a not-for-profit that I co-founded back in 2008, so 14 years ago. That supports and helps LGBTQ entrepreneurs and founders to start their businesses, to grow their businesses through education, mentorship, connection to other capital, to connection to others. When people asked me at that time why that was something that I wanted to do, there were really two answers. And one was because I wanted to give back, and I felt like I would have liked to have someone to connect with. I had just come from starting and growing and selling my own business in that entrepreneurial experience. And I've always felt like you can connect, and this is obviously an experience common to other groups, you can connect better with people who share or have shared similar challenges, similar battles, similar life experiences. But the other side of it, and I was very vocal, and I would mention the story I just told you a moment ago several times, was really the idea of elevating role models in professions and in places where people don't expect it. Remember, this was before there was any publicly out CEO of any Fortune 1000 companies. It was before Tim Cook came out, even though certainly within certain circles, it was not a secret that Tim Cook had a partner and it was gay. But for years, the response internally and, to people asking him why the story had never been mentioned publicly was always that it had no bearing on his work. And that's absolutely true. But what you're missing is the responsibility that you, as at the time, the CEO of one of the, if not the most, valuable and powerful company in the world, you bear the responsibility of the positive impact that you are missing to have, right? That you're lacking, you're avoiding to have this huge impact as a role model or as a representation figure for all those who would look up to you. And also for those who would, again, have their preconceived notion challenged by saying, oh, I have a perfect idea of who gay people are and what roles they can play in society. And, society would be better off without them, which certainly was, and now maybe is less, but it's applicable to trans individuals now in a way that, at the time wasn't even possible to speak about. And so we are facing the same challenges. And I always felt the way to counter them and to combat them is always the same, which is to elevate stories of amazing people that counter those notions and that show the kind of contributions and positive elements of society and loved ones of our families every single of those persons are.
So if Start Out is, the not-for-profit support network for the LGBTQ community to become entrepreneurs and to embrace the entrepreneur spirit and to build and to grow companies, what's the genesis for Angels and how does that get started?
Well, so in fact, I joke, right? I'm not a founder of Angels. That credit goes to David and Paul, my business partners and co-managing directors at Angels. But I joke that by having started a start out, I take credit for the petri dish in which Angels was sort of incubated and grown. In fact, David and I met first. David had been an entrepreneur and had experience as an angel investor in a group called Golden Seeds, which is an angel group, angel organizations that supports women entrepreneurs.
Yep.
And David joined the board of Startout with me. And then maybe a couple of years later, we met Paul, who also had started businesses before and came through the network as, you know, a contributor, a member of the mentorship sort of community. And David and Paul started talking about how Startout was great, but there was this one thing that Startout wasn't going to do, which is drive direct investment and capital towards the entrepreneurs that it was mentoring or creating or fostering or whatnot. And so they came to me and talked to me about this Angels idea that they had. And I was all on board, right? I was like, this is exactly what needs to happen. It's absolutely what Startout can do. And I can't go do this with you, because at the time I had started basically 3 other companies. I was
Serial entrepreneur.
I had a startup that I loved and was an awesome idea, and that failed a couple of years later because it was way before its time. Maybe one day it'll be.
I'm very familiar with that concept, Lorenzo.
Yeah. And then I had started this other weird career in the world of the arts by complete accident. And so I was writing and producing a musical that was...
We're going to go into that in a minute. So, okay. So you're doing that.
So I told him no. I told him I would not go do this with them, but that they could count me as an investor. So I started investing with them. And, it wasn't until a few years later, I think that they would tell you that they did Gangels, and they ran Gangels much as a hobby or a side project for a number of years for a lot of reasons, right? It wasn't sort of quite getting into the gear that it needed. And in 2018, we started talking again about the potential for Gangels to have a much bigger impact on the venture capital ecosystem than with the model that it had originally been born with. It had originally been born as this angel group of LGBT investors investing in other LGBT founders, and that was a way to counter some of the imbalance in the funding sources that were happening in the venture ecosystem. Women entrepreneurs lacked funding, LGBT entrepreneurs lacked funding, minority entrepreneurs lacked funding, and that was a way to kind of balance it out. But we basically sat around and, there was an episode where we got an opportunity to invest in a friend's company who was an LGBT entrepreneur, but very successful in a very much later stage of funding with big VCs involved. And we turned around and it was very easy for our network to want to invest. And when we asked that entrepreneur why they were letting us, besides sort of the personal relationship, is they said, oh, it's because I think it would be really valuable and it's the right thing to do to allow capital from diverse sources to take advantage of this incredible opportunity that I am fortunate to have built. And I think I can convince the VCs to let me do it. And we sat back for a moment and we're like, hold on a second. The kind of impact that we could have on the ecosystem if we didn't only focus on driving capital to diverse entrepreneurs, which is still important, and it's still the bread and butter of what we do, even though we've broadened from just LGBT entrepreneurs to all diverse teams, because it is not, representation and lack of thereof is not a purview of one single group. And also, sometimes you have a diverse team that lacks diversity of other kinds. And so we said we can drive capital to those diverse teams. We can also drive diverse capital to all companies that we invest in, providing unique opportunities of access of wealth and value creations to communities and individuals that may have the means, but don't have the network and the access to those. And we can partner with each and every single one of the companies we would invest in to be the agent for that change, to be the support to help them bring on more diverse leaders, more diverse staff, and even more diverse board members onto their organization. that was the moment when everything changed for Angels. And we really started to find a place in the ecosystem that was absolutely unique.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And I don't know if you remember, if we go back to Gangel's first investment in Alto, and I think it is important to say that Gangel's is invested in Alto. Um, it was a very oversubscribed round, and you all called, and I had the very same reaction, which was that we have to make room for this team and this group. And from a D&I perspective, it's incredibly important to do, and that was the beginning of our relationship.
And I not only I'm thankful and I appreciate that, and I appreciate that there are more entrepreneurs and venture capital partners every day that recognize and realize that this is a way to make change. But I also hope I don't put you on the spot. I hope that we've delivered value to you as a partner in the time that has gone by, to basically say not only it was the right thing to do, just generally speaking, but it was a beneficial thing to do for us and for the business, so that we want them involved even more going forward. And why do I say that? It's because it's that same thing I was telling you at the beginning. Sometimes you do it by elevating the story of an amazing person. Sometimes you're going to a company and say, trust me, take us on and we'll deliver so much value to you that you'll turn around and you want diverse investors involved, not just because it's the right thing morally or ethically or, from a social justice, because they will go the distance and deliver so much more value, vis-a-vis what they're investing or something like that.
100%, because it's not just that we get diverse investors. We also get to attract diverse candidates. And we get to say, hey, our money literally is where our mouth is on this one. Yep. Right. And actually, rather than me talking about all the added value that comes from Gangels and the relationship and the conversations that you make available to Alto, as well as your other portfolio companies, I'd love for you to tell the audience how Gangels has grown beyond just a venture capital firm. I want you to talk about like assets under management now and the size of the portfolio. Yes, but there's so many other opportunities that you bring to the table. So I just want to let you go.
Yeah, honestly, the size of the portfolio and the number of investors, and those are fine. Those are perfunctory elements to the growth and the impact that we can have. I always talk about the size of what we call our venture inclusion program, in terms of the kind of efforts that we employ to make sure that the venture ecosystem at all completely is, again, diverse, inclusive, and accessible. First of all, with the companies that we invest in, we have created sort of an internal infrastructure to help them source talent from places that they would normally not be looking to or have access to. And we do this with partnerships with other organizations that coalesce talent from minority groups or ethnic minorities or female candidates and so on. And we put them all into sort of a pipeline that our companies can recruit from. We also have this incredibly vibrant community of Gangels, not just members and investors, but also social members, people that are connected to our community. In fact, we organize so many in-person events all around the country to connect our companies and our members together, to learn from each other, to meet each other, to leverage their networks, to support and help each other. And we promote to all of them an entire job portal that is made of all of the positions that are open at our portfolio companies. The second thing that we do, which is something that probably in 2018 people were starting to talk about, and it's better now, but it really still needs a ton of help, is the incredible lack of diversity that board of directors in the private sectors, especially in the big venture-backed companies, really have. And there are some reasons for why that happens, right? You have fundamental sort of unbalance of founding teams. So we know that the majority of the founders, CEOs of companies are still, straight white men for the most part, right? And therefore,
don't forget bald.
Yes. And then you basically have some board representation unavoidably because of that, right? You have founding representatives on the board of directors. Then you have lack of diversity from the venture partnerships, right? because that is certainly also a statement of fact. It's getting better, but very slowly. And so you have members and associate and partners at venture firms that are taking board seats as representative of the investments that they make that are also taking non-diverse seats. And so you're left with, a deck that is stacked against you when you're trying to add diverse voices onto a board of directors. And we know from the public sectors, from actual data that has been reviewed and studied, that when you actually have board of directors that are more diverse and inclusive, not only it's the right thing to do. Secondly, it might often soon be the required thing to do if you want to get listed on a public exchange. But actually, those companies outperform their competition when their competitors' board are not as diverse. That is actually borne out in the data. And there's nothing to indicate that the same shouldn't be true in the private sectors as well. So what we've done is we have established a number of really strong partnerships with a dozen, probably almost 24 organizations that each one of them has a mandate to find amazing people within certain underrepresented groups that are either already serving on public boards or are qualified to serve on public boards and want to help diversify the private sector. And whenever...
So if someone wants to get involved at Angels, if they want to be a Angels investor, where do they go to do that?
You can just go on Angels.com, read all about it. There is an easy process to actually join as a member. You
can use your Alto IRA to invest in Angels.
You also can use Alto IRA to invest in Angels deals. That is absolutely the truth. And I was saying, like, we basically tell each one of our portfolio companies, like, at some point you're going to have a board seat that opens up, or you're going to add a board seat. Please think about making sure that the pipeline for that position is as diverse as possible. Don't just ask your friends or your VCs or your other board members who's a great person that they know, because chances are they're going to recommend someone that looks like them or that comes from the same backgrounds as they are. Look far and wide. And I'm so proud to basically say that in the time that we've put this in place, we've helped 500 people from underrepresented backgrounds be seen, viewed, interviewed for positions at boards of directors of our portfolio companies. And we've placed the winning candidates. We've helped find the winning candidates on the board seats for 11 or 12 of our portfolio companies. So today, and are in active conversations with 24 of other companies, helping them source candidates. This is a huge impact in the
100%.
And then the third thing that we do, it has less to do with the companies themselves, but we basically are trying to train and create a fellowship program for people from MBAs or startups from underrepresented backgrounds to go into venture, to basically get experience as an investor, analyst, associate, and basically help diversify the pipeline for the venture capital ecosystem so that we get more decision makers and more capital allocators that are from diverse backgrounds. And, obviously all of this could not happen if it weren't supported by an incredibly diverse group of member investors that are actually joining this network because, yes, they want to find amazing opportunities to invest in. And in fact, we have awesome companies like Alto that we are able to invest in through our network, but also because they want to help with our mission. And they do so by connecting with each other, creating this community, helping our portfolio companies. And it's so diverse. We have over 2,700 members right now. And over 1,500 are LGBTQ identifying. I think about a third of the entire group is female identifying. And we have about a quarter, maybe 28% that are investors of color. All of those numbers could be better. And man, we try to encourage everybody who know folks from underrepresented background that would find value and could learn about this asset class and join Angels to join us, because driving more diverse capital is really important. But what's super cool is that of the capital that we've deployed in our portfolio, over 60% has come from actual diverse check writers.
That's amazing. So I want to switch the subject for a second, if that's okay with you. I want to go to Broadway.
Sure.
I want to talk about your theater career.
Yeah.
And how that got started, happenstance or otherwise,
Yeah.
and what it means to you.
It's a huge part of my life. I think it's also the way in which my um, kind of soul is fed by two different, completely different groups of people, challenges, ways of changing the world or having an impact on people. I often joke that being an entrepreneur, one of the biggest, most valuable skills you can have is to be a really good storyteller, right? You're always telling the story of your vision, your company, why people should join you, you should hire them, why people should give you money, why people should buy your product. I mean, it's always about creating an emotional connection with folks. And as I told you, there was this period of my life when that's what I thought I wanted to do. I wanted to write. I wanted to direct for the movies, but I never really paid it that much attention after that. Once I embarked on my journey and technology and AI, and I built my first company. It was a technology heavy company in the web search space, and eventually sold to Microsoft. I was not really thinking about this anymore. So sold a business to Microsoft. I was in a moment of, I don't know, kind of divergence. You're looking around and you're thinking about things and you don't know what you're going to do. I had this other company that I told you before. I was doing Start Out. And one night I am in, and I've always enjoyed the theater. I was always been a theater goer, but I've never had or harbored a dream of working in the theater. That was just not something that I was like, oh, when I'm going to work in the theater. No. So one night I am in a theater in New York City, and I'm there with a really close friend of mine. And all of a sudden, I hear a voice behind me, and actually my friend had turned around to talk to someone who'd been behind us because they'd been talking about a show that we had seen the night before. And I recognized the voice, and it was like this deep bass voice. And it was the actor George Takei from the original Star Trek series, Sulu, Lieutenant Sulu in the original Star Trek series. And I mentioned my geek credentials at the very beginning, so I had been watching Star Trek throughout my childhood and youth. And I kind of, I wasn't starstruck, but I start conversations like, oh my God, he was there with his husband, Brad. And we just exchange a few words, right? They're there to see theater. We're there to see theater. We watch the show. The next night, my friend and I are going to see a Broadway show, and we sit into this dark theater, and we are sitting next to George and his husband again. So total kind of alignment of things. The point that Brad is literally thinking that we are being stalking them. But
Right.
What happens is that throughout the middle of that show, George is really crying. We heard him like sobbing at one of the scenes. And so at intermission, we're there and like, we're making small talk again. We asked him, it was like, wow, we heard you cry. That was like really impactful. And he goes into telling us the story of how much it reminded him of his dad and his family. When he was a child, when he was a child of 5, 6, he and his family were taken at gunpoint by U.S. Army. And they were taken first to a holding camp and then to an imprisonment camp where
Yep.
they stayed for 4 years for no crime. They lost their home, their work, their place of business, their possessions, their assets were frozen, for effectively the only reason of having descended from and looking like the same people who had bombed Pearl Harbor and that
Right.
the U.S. had declared war to. George was born in this country. His father was born in this country. His mother was born in Japan and had come many years prior to that. But his little brother and little sister were all American citizens. And this was an enormous injustice that he had somehow reconciled with, but that had fractured his family in ways that I had no idea. And this brought back a flood of emotions. First of all, you have to realize that even as a white guy from Europe, I had arrived as an immigrant right before September 11, and September 11 changed the shift and the tone of how people talked about, regarded, behaved towards anyone who was an immigrant. And there was
Yeah.
always this aura of suspicion around anybody. And, obviously I didn't have it nearly as bad as anybody of brown color or, of Muslim faith that was an immigrant. But I could still feel that very recent in my memory. And the second thing is that you just connect with the experience. Here you have these immigrants who had come, his mom had come and his father's fathers had come to the States in search of a better life for themselves and their friend and their family, and had built a life for them. And something happens that they have zero control over that completely changes their life for the worst and shifts the world from upside down. And at the time, I was still on a green card. Right now, I'm a U.S. citizen and naturalized. But at the time, and you always remember, first on visas and then on a green card, how precarious the life that you're building is. Like, something can happen. You don't know. A change in policy. I mean, look at what happened when Trump got elected, and all of a sudden people couldn't reunite with their families because there was bans on people traveling. These were people that had homes and jobs and businesses in the United States. And I felt like that story, the human piece of that story, just needed to be told. So my friend happens to be a really talented composer, but none of us had ever worked in the theater. And we went home, had exchanged information with George. And a few days later, I still have that email, reached out to George and said, meeting you has touched us so much. And we think that this story would be an incredible story to be told to the world. And we would like to write a musical with you in it about this story and take it to Broadway. And honestly, it just sounds crazy.
It does sound crazy.
These two people that had never set foot, other than as audience goers, into a Broadway theater, and said, and I had that kind of entrepreneur chutzpah that is basically like, how hard can it be? Like, you'll figure it out. You'll hire the right people. You'll learn. And we kind of set on that journey, and it took a long time, but this was 2008 when we met.
But wait, what was his reaction to the email?
So the email also included a song that we basically had written, and it was already titled for the title of the show. The show would come to be titled Allegiance, and it speaks about the allegiance of one's to country, but also one's to one's own family, and how do those kind of fracture. And it's a really kind of interesting sort of take on that. The song that we sent to George, though, is no longer in the show. One thing that you should know about writing for Broadway is that, oh man, you go through hundreds of drafts and things are put in and thrown out, and there's way more songs in the trunk, so-called, than they are in the score of the show now. But George wrote back saying that he felt that that was the life that he was like his mission's work, his life's mission, right? And that he wanted to tell that story. He had always felt like it needed to be a play. He had never thought it needed to be a musical. We made the argument that is when emotions soar the highest, that music is required and necessary. And he said that he had started crying at listening to that song. And he was kind of, he was sold on the idea that this would be something that he wanted to try and do. There are so many pieces that need to get in line before you actually get to anything. But the second really big luck sort of strike of luck, so to speak, was when we started talking about who would be the female lead for the show. There's only a handful, or at least, especially at the time, a handful of really well-known, famous Broadway Asian actresses that can sing the kind of sort of type of score that we envisioned. And the one that obviously came to mind was Lea Salonga, who was the original Tony Award winner for Miss Saigon when she was 17 on the West End and on Broadway, and had hardly ever done anything else on Broadway since. She had done one other show, but and the luck that we had, that we didn't know, when we reached out through her agent about the very first version of this show, and we wanted to do a reading of it in Los Angeles, is that, first of all, she has family in Los Angeles. That's always good. She married into a family who's half Japanese. So her husband is half Chinese and half Japanese. And on her husband's father's side, there had been people that had been imprisoned during the internment. So she felt like she also kind of wanted to tell the story for her children, right, for her daughter. And the third thing that happened is that she's a huge Star Trek fan. And so the idea of doing a reading with Sulu at the time was like, yeah, I'll come out to Los Angeles to do a reading. And so she lived in the Philippines and we did this. But I think that there was enough emotional power, even in the very first version of what we put together at the time, that got everybody really committed to see this through for the long run. We would open in San Diego for our world premiere of Allegiance in 2012. And notice, I talked a lot about representation. This was also the first time that a cast that was all Asian American was telling a truly Asian American story where there was no like white savior or anything like that. With a lot of Asian Americans in the creative team. Our director was Asian American. In fact, his father had been, or his family had been imprisoned in camps in Canada, which Canada, our nice neighbors, also did the same thing at the time.
Yeah.
And our composer, my friend, is Asian American. So there was a huge component of it. So it was a first also for representation. And in San Diego, it broke all box office records. It did super well with both critics and audiences. So we were like feeling, yeah, let's go to Broadway. And we marched on to Broadway. And, you know, life is timing. We ended up opening on Broadway 3 weeks after Hamilton did. And it was, it was challenging. We stayed open for 6 months. But the show became a movie. There's a movie that people can watch now. Super proud of it. It went to Los Angeles. And honestly, and I'm making the announcement now for the first time in any public setting, actually, because we just closed the contract yesterday. There's going to be a London production.
Nice. Congratulations.
Starting in January 2023.
That's really cool. That is an amazing story. You know, Lorenzo, one of the things I say is that what's completely underappreciated in the world of startups and growth stage companies is the luck that's involved.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of really smart people, a lot of people who work really hard, but you kind of got to catch a break here and there. And the other thing that I frequently say is luck oftentimes is referred to as the intersection between hard work and opportunity. And I like to add a third vector, which is awareness. And clearly you had awareness.
I appreciate that. I won't say that about myself, but I call it serendipity. And it's really the idea that when a door opens, if you don't see it and you're not willing to walk through it,
then it doesn't matter.
Yep.
I totally agree. So what's the hardest part about being an entrepreneur? What's the hardest thing you have to do to start a company?
Honestly, I think the hardest thing, and it is the one thing that comes easier to people who actually do it than the rest of the population, but it truly is, I think, the defining moment is not just having the idea, but it's actually truly believing that it is possible, right? So right. The biggest thing, you know, I always talk, and this goes back to why representation matters, right? I don't remember who it was, but I often tell the story because of, nobody had broken the 4-minute mile, like running a mile under 4 minutes until one person did. And then within days or months, a whole bunch of people started running miles under 4 minutes. Nothing had changed about people or people's bodies or training or what.
Except that someone had done it.
Someone had done it, right? It's that 0 to 1 that changes everything. So when I say representation is the most powerful force for changing the world, is because you can show to someone who before that never thought something would be possible for them, that it is possible for someone who looks like them, who comes from their background. And this is true in every field of life, right? And so you have this responsibility to show people that something is possible. And I think that what's really difficult when, you look at the journey of an entrepreneur is to believe in yourself and in your capabilities and in the, sort of in what the world will throw at you, to know that something that you have envisioned, something that you came up with is possible. And that creates that 0 to 1 moment when you actually don't just think about something, but you go out and start doing it. That moment is by far the hardest. I can't tell you, even I have had so many ideas I haven't acted on. And that is, it's just
Me
really
too. Yeah, no, it is. I mean, the first time I thought about starting Alto was in 2013, when I made my first self-directed IRA investment. I didn't start Alto until 2016, right? Like, so I get that. What was the hardest part about selling the business, your first business?
so okay, so I have to kind of put a few things in context. I was young. I was the technical co-founder in a company that had two other co-founders, and I learned an enormous amount from them. And so it wasn't that I was saddled with the sole responsibility of deciding for the fate of my company. Obviously, I was an intrinsic part of it. And I think that luck played a big part in it too, because we had built a really stellar team and really some awesome value in the business between the license and the IP that we had built and the technology that we had built. But it was a challenging moment. We didn't just start out saying we want to sell the business. We were, getting to the point where we wanted to raise more money. And it was very early 2008. And the markets just really kind of seemed odd. The metrics that people were using in order to raise money were all of a sudden very different than they were in 2005. When the conversation opened up around the sale, you kind of really look at the balance between risk, reward, and opportunity. And you say, okay, we could raise money at a pretty much lower valuation than we thought we would. The amount of, given the amount of dilution and the amount of value that we would need to build in order to get even just the same financial outcome for the stakeholders, increases the risk drastically, right? Like so many more things need to go right in order to get to that versus the opportunity of at that time selling the business to Microsoft. We had been building a relationship with Microsoft as a business partner. We knew the people that we were working with. We knew that it was not just a safe lending for the folks in our team, but a positive, solid way in which they could continue to actually work on the product. So it felt like an easier than I think in a lot of context a decision would have been. I think I saw the upside and the potential that Microsoft would bring to what we were doing. So it never felt like incredibly hard. It felt very hard to deal with the uncertainty that led to it. That was like that moment when you're like, okay,
Tough being an entrepreneur.
they're telling us they want to buy the business, but they're not telling us how much. And we have these funding conversations on the left and the right. And we need to be straightforward with everybody and kind of like, how do you play the left and the right again? That was like so much uncertainty, right? And it feels like you could play your hand too hard and end up with nothing. Or you could sort of be suboptimal in the decisions that you make. Honestly, luck, and timing, because just not to belabor this, but we started, the conversation shifted from a partnership with Microsoft to a sale to Microsoft, not because of anything that we did, but because of something that happened macroscopically, which is Microsoft was trying to buy Yahoo, and Yahoo said no. Effectively, they rejected a hostile bid, which meant Microsoft had this cash that was like, oh, we want to compete in search. We can't buy Yahoo. What do we do? Well, let's go out and buy all the cool technology companies and startups that we can to compete in search. So that was the first kind of lucky moment that we were at the intersection of. The second luck, total, whatever, is we, and this, I'll take some credit for it, but I had, I was the technical co-founder. I had been from the very beginning kind of really being kind of OCD around the way we were using open source software versus a built-in house software versus licensed stuff. And everything was really neatly separated with good sort of interfaces in between in completely different repositories, all of that stuff, right? And remember, Microsoft at the time was not nearly as embracing of open source software as it is now. So, people always telling you, the technical due diligence is going to, for a company that the value is like really built in the technology and in the IP and the software, it's going to take forever. Well, we signed our LOI in June. We had finished our technical due diligence by the end of July.
That's impressive.
We signed the definitive agreement in mid-August of 2008, about a month, not even a month before a complete market meltdown that would probably have tanked the deal.
Luck and timing. You can't draw it on the board. You just can't. So we're getting towards the end here. By the way, there have been a lot of favorite moments in this interview for me, but one of which was more physical than verbal, which is when you started talking about Broadway. You grew about like 3 or 4 inches. like just the light that just came up was amazing. And
I'm Italian, so I talk with my hands. I always have to.
Is there another way to talk? I don't know. So, I mean, but it was just fantastic to see. So, I want to thank you for being on the show. I really enjoyed this time with you. And B, I want to ask you for 2 more names of people that should be on the show. Who else should I talk to?
Okay, you're putting me on the spot. I was not prepared at all.
It's a surprise.
So there are so many people that I know that are changing the world in so many different ways.
You only get 2, so you have defense.
And it can be from any field. Like you don't have like any.
Lorenzo, I like talking to interesting people who are doing interesting things. Anyone.
Wow. Thank God that you have an editor that can cut all of this thinking time. Okay, so give me a moment. Okay, so someone who I have a lot of respect for, also Italian, also an incredible founder, entrepreneur, is Matteo Franceschetti. Matteo is the founder of 8 Sleep. And there is a real reason why, besides the fact that he's awesome, he's Italian, he's a good entrepreneur and all of those things. But the kind of impact that he had on me with what he's doing with this company is pretty remarkable. I often joke that if I could go back to tell my 17-year-old like a really big lesson I've learned in life is sleep more and sleep better, because that is your superpower. That will make you so much better in performing at everything that you do. And you think that being able to sleep 4 hours a night is awesome, and it's not. And he's really kind of changing the game when it comes to sort of sleep quality and sleep fitness for people. And then the second person is someone who worked for me at PowerSet, who went on to do some pretty awesome things and is now the founder of a company called Turing. His name is Jonathan Siddarth. And I really love what he's doing, not just because he's building a great business, but because he will tell you the reason why he's doing it is so related to some things I truly care about, which is talent is uniformly distributed and opportunity is not. And he's building a huge platform to help the best, incredible technical talent all over the world be accessible and be able to be leveraged by some of the best entrepreneurs and companies and innovation centers that we have.
Lorene Pendleton.
Oh, I love
said the exact same thing. Talent is distributed. Opportunity is not. Could not agree more. Something we definitely need to change, and something that you and the entire team at Angels is changing. Lorenzo, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
The Altogether Show is brought to you by Alto. Alto knows that achieving true portfolio diversification means investing in more than just stocks and bonds. That's why Alto developed a streamlined platform to make it easy and cost-effective to invest tax-advantaged retirement savings in alternatives, assets like real estate, venture capital, and crypto, that are outside of the public markets and available through Alto's growing list of investment partners. To learn more, visit altoira.com/altogether.